Alright, Tim, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a standalone video in the coffee shop. Not really a response to anything you said. Well, maybe to part one, I'm not sure. Or more to the intro, not even part one. We were talking about, let's set up this dichotomy here between the kingdom and the current, and I'm going to be arguing for the kingdom, and I'm going to be going in the lion's den and arguing against a bunch of people about what's superior, which is the better approach, I guess, to life, ethics, etc. And what I want to do in this video is I want to kind of split it in half. I want to talk halfway about what I think you mean by the kingdom, and I hope you'll correct me if I'm wrong, if I misunderstand where you're really coming from. But I think it's helpful a lot of times when you're engaged in serious and honest dialogue to really try to understand where the other person is coming from, how they understand their own position. I'm not saying you don't do that. I'm saying I want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a dissertation, so to speak, of what I think the kingdom is and how you understand it. The kingdom of heaven is perhaps the most, it's the favorite phrase of Jesus in the synoptic gospels. And if we're really going to know anything about the historical Jesus, that's where we have to start, and that's almost where we have to stop. But I'm not going to make this a video about the historical Jesus, even the fact that I really don't believe the synoptics give us even better than a 50% picture of what the man was really like. Let's assume that it's right, that it's on point. It's obvious that somebody really liked this phrase, the kingdom of heaven. And where does it come from? Well, it comes, you actually have to go back to the Old Testament. You have to go back to about the last 10 or 8 books of the Old Testament. And start with Jeremiah and then read from Jeremiah to the end. Some Old Testaments go longer than others, but take the, Reformed New Testament or the Protestant New Testament and read to the end. What you're talking about is the later prophets, and what they're all talking about is they're lamenting the fact that Israel keeps getting run roughshod over by these imperial powers. And how they analyze that is they say, well, this is because we have not really been doing what the law wants us to do. Not necessarily what the law says, but what the law wants us to do. There's a part about the law being inscribed on human hearts, and I think that is very, very telling and also very meaningful to how Jesus really understood, the synoptic Jesus understood what the kingdom of heaven really was. It was transcending the law without overturning the law. Meaning the law was written on stone, and that's a metaphor. It was written on stone with certain prescriptions. And Jesus said, now let me inscribe it on your hearts. He didn't actually say that, but that's what he meant. He was going back to the Old Testament metaphors, because he was opposing an imperial power, that would be Rome. And he was attempting to say that this kingdom, meaning it's a program for divine social justice, or social justice that is divinely mandated and divinely supervised. So that's why it's a kingdom. It's a kingdom because God would be the king. And if everybody does pretty much what they're supposed to do, meaning abide by the law or keep the commandments, as he told the young man who came to him and said, Lord, what must I do to be saved? He didn't say, have faith in me and do no works. You know what I mean? He said, keep the commandments. And I'm going to get back to that dichotomy later on when I offer my critique. But what Jesus was really talking about, I think, is pretty simple. He was saying that if there was, it kind of even goes back to that story in Genesis, where it's like Abraham is arguing with God. I think it was Abraham, right? About, what if we find, 10 righteous men? Or does he even start with 10? He starts with like 50. And then, he whittles God down. And it's like, if we even find 10 righteous men, then I won't destroy. I think it was Sodom. I forget. But the point is that if you have a righteousness, the Hebrew Zadok, is very important to understand. A lot of where Jesus is coming from, a lot of where James, his brother, is coming from. If you read the epistle of James, which interestingly enough, Martin Luther did not want in his Bible. Probably because it said that faith without works is dead, or like a corpse. But anyway, so what is the kingdom of heaven? It is divinely supervised, divinely mandated social justice in which the law becomes inscribed on hearts of individuals, and then people basically go out and do good things to other people. Their faith becomes enlivened through works. Habakkuk was the one that said, "For the righteous man lives by faith." He didn't say by faith alone. Matter of fact, nobody says faith alone. In fact, the only person that says faith alone is James, and he says it ain't faith alone. But anyway, I'm having fun with this little, internecine strife in Christianity, which is, I think, where I'm going to turn it now, because I think I kind of hit the nail on the head with what the kingdom is. It's divinely mandated social justice. It's the law being inscribed on hearts. And what does that mean, like, eschatologically? I'll let Tim decide on that, He sounds like he has a little bit more pragmatic view of eschatology than, like rapturism and all that kind of crap. But anyway. So what you have is, you have Jesus continuing the prophetic tradition of the Old Testament, the later Old Testament prophets. Continuing that, and the idea was to make people better people, make them Zadok, or righteous, truly righteous in the heart, not just righteous by, this is why he had so much trouble with the Pharisees, because the Pharisees weren't about actually being righteous, like he said. They were like whitewashed sepulchres with dead men's bones inside. The point is, inside versus outside. So, Jesus was continuing this same tradition that actually a guy named Muhammad picked up long after Jesus, and carried on that same tradition. So you have the Judaic stream of understanding, which goes through the whole Old Testament and the later prophets, and then Jesus picks that up, and then a guy named Paul comes along. A guy named Paul comes along and fucks everything up. He fucks everything up by basically saying, because he was neurotic, just like Luther. Paul and Luther had that in common, and even probably Calvin too, was that they were neurotic individuals. They looked at the law and all the things the law required and said, there's no way, I can't do this, man. Jesus actually said you could. The point wasn't that you did all this, like don't eat shellfish and don't wear clothing woven of two fabrics. The point is whether or not it became inscribed on your heart. Like the whole Sermon on the Mount. Paul obviously wasn't there to hear the Sermon on the Mount, which is why he had so much trouble with the legalisms of the Pharisees. But he was a Pharisee of Pharisees, right? That's probably his problem, was that he was a Pharisee of Pharisees. So Paul came along and fucked everything up and turned Christianity into this religion based on something called grace through faith. Now, I'm not going to get into the works part of it. It's almost like James was written against Paul, but that's beside the point. It's almost like Paul and Jesus don't see eye to eye on pretty much anything. But that's, again, beside the point. What is the fucking point? I don't know. Maybe, Tim, that your concept of the kingdom, as cool as it might be within like the stream of understanding the whole, progression of monotheism through the Western traditions, is that it got hijacked. It got hijacked by mainly three guys. That would be Paul, number one, Augustine, number two, and Luther, number three. Calvin is just a despicable bastard. But anyway, so those three people hijacked Jesus and his kingdom and turned it into something completely different, which is why you got people running around like Ted Haggard. They can do that because of Paul, because of Augustine, and because of Luther, because of these neurotic men that refuse to allow Jesus' equanimity to reach its own apogee. If I can use some big words that nobody fucking understands, because we all not like to do that. So anyway, what's my critique of the kingdom? My critique of the kingdom is it can't work because Christianity won't let it work. Regardless of whether or not it would succeed or fail on its own merits, it's never been tried. It has never really been tried, except if you look maybe at the book of Acts in the early church. We can even take that with a grain of salt. But still, Christianity became institutionalized, and then it became overrun with Pauline doctrine, which reduced it to essentially an above-ground mystery cult based on this dying, resurrecting God, rather than what Jesus wanted it to be based on, which was doing good works. And James, they're brothers, so of course they're going to be speaking kind of similar. So it's like you have this glitch in the system, which is Paul and then the Pauline interpreters going later on, that kind of just hijack Jesus' message and fuck it all to hell. So my question to you, Tim, is as a Christian, how do you feel about that hijacking of your religion by these outsiders, by these interlopers, by these non-messiahs? Anyway.